Number 3. When enlisting a real estate broker to represent them, buyers agree to pay the buyer's broker when escrow closes, but the person responsible for payment may be negotiated in the transaction. Part A. Buyer pays the compensation pursuant to a buyer representation agreement. A buyer's broker may negotiate the amount of compensation directly with the buyer and then document that agreement in a buyer representation agreement. The buyer then becomes contractually obligated to pay the broker by providing funds to escrow prior to the closing of a transaction. Part B. Seller pays the compensation. Number 1. Buyer negotiates for seller to compensate buyer's broker. A buyer may make a conditional offer to the seller by including a term in the purchase offer asking the seller to pay the buyer's broker if the buyer has already agreed to pay their own broker pursuant to a buyer representation agreement. If such a term is included in the purchase offer, the request will become one term among many that a seller may accept, reject, or negotiate by way of a counteroffer. The possibility of asking the seller to pay the buyer's contractual compensation obligation option should be discussed when creating a buyer representation agreement and prior to an offer being made. Number 2. Buyer's agent negotiates an agreement directly with seller. If a seller is unrepresented or does not have an exclusive agency relationship with another broker, a buyer's broker may approach that seller asking the seller to sign an agreement, single-party compensation agreement, to pay the buyer's broker. In this situation, the seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker compensation without necessarily creating an agency relationship with the broker. When that happens, the buyer's broker is advised to use a seller non-agency form to inform the seller that the buyer's broker will be acting on behalf of the buyer only and not act as the seller's agent throughout the transaction. However, because the seller is unrepresented, the buyer's agent will inevitably have to do more work to facilitate the transaction, which may be factored into the negotiation of the single-party compensation agreement. Part C. Changing practice related to a seller's broker's offer of compensation. Historically, in California, many sellers' brokers used a multiple listing service to make a unilateral offer to compensate a buyer's broker who procured a buyer for the seller's property. However, the nationwide settlement prohibits the seller's broker from using an MLS to make such an offer of compensation. The California Association of Realtors listing agreement forms no longer provide for such offers of cooperating broker compensation, nor include other forms in its library of forms that might facilitate such offers. Buyers and sellers must separately negotiate compensation with their respective brokers, as specified above. Thank you for watching this video on the Broker Compensation Advisory. I hope these videos have helped you understand how seller and buyer brokers get compensated. As a reminder, these aspects of compensation will be included in all transactions going forward. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. This is May On from Sotheby's International Realty. Thank you for your time and support.